I'm finally immersed enough again in Rinascita to talk about Cartethyia. This is a reminder that you are what you eat. I eat Italian and depressed. But seeing as I'm temporarily Italian enough to talk about this region and its characters again, I thought I'd give you guys the rundown on Wuthering Wave's newest and dearest character, Cartethyia. When I was writing the script, I actually kept writing other characters' names because for some reason there are not one, not two, but 8 different characters whose names start with C, and 4 of them are from Rinascita. But yes, this time we're talking about the elf girl, and I cannot wait to show her to you. So with that said, my name is Braxophone, but you can call me Brax, and let's talk about Cartethyia. If you thought other Wuwa characters were hard, I hope you're all ready for a crazy time, because picking Cartethyia as your main DPS is like choosing to watch all of One Piece if the entire thing was animated in the style of Season 1. What the? Cartethia's kit is very long, with each ability cannibalizing itself enough to look like the American tax code. I am now going to explain this to you like you're 5. Cartethia's damage scales off of HP and not attack. Cartethyia has 3 swords like the quest. You want to get all 3 swords out at the same time because each one will give you a buff later. To get a sword, you have to do a thing. The first sword can be placed via a heavy attack or an intro skill. It gives you interrupt resistance and the ability to stagnate enemies. The second sword is placed by finishing your basic attack combo or by landing a dodge counter combo. Her basic attack combo goes to 4 except for when it doesn't because you jumped, in which case it goes to 4.5. The second sword will give you a 50% arrow erosion amplify and also makes enemies arrow erode faster. The third sword is placed with her skill, and it lets her copy and paste erosion to enemies, which later increases her damage. Each sword lasts up to 20 seconds on the field. Now you might be wondering, oh voice in my head, why do I want to sword max the elf? Well, the answer is quite simple. Your goal is to become the big booba giantess that could crush an entire school by leaning over. When your Resonance Liberation is available, you can either live out your fantasy or do a Cartethylian damage. If you want to do the latter, then here's what you need to know. When you change into Fleur-de-Lis, you drop to 50% HP, and you get new basic attacks, new heavy attacks, new skills, a new forte gauge, and a new Resonance Liberation. You even get a brand new jump attack, which is crazy because I don't remember my spacebar doing damage before. If you had all your swords out, you will get all of those buffs, and if you didn't have all your swords out, you won't get all the buffs, so I recommend you get those out. Your goal is to do a ton of damage and fill up your forte gauge so you can do an even bigger Resonance Liberation. To do that, you want to take full advantage of your kit by using your new skills that group up enemies and also just look really cool. In fact, your basic attack 5, mid-air attack 2, and skill all have special properties to them after you're in Fleur-de-Lis form. What they'll do is check the amount of enemies that they hit for arrow erosion, and if they have any stacks at all, they will all be granted arrow erosion stacks to match the highest stack enemy. Think of it like a room full of 10 people with no windows, and one person had Chipotle for dinner. At some point, everyone is going to be taking the same damage over time. This effect only works if you got the third sword though. Other than turning arrow erosion into some Raguna STD, Fleur-de-Lis also does her own unique damage. In her Aboba form, she's able to actually dish out an attack by jumping. I don't mean just a mid-air attack, I mean literally pressing the jump button does an attack. That's kind of cool. At least I think so. But the interesting thing about Fleur-de-Lis is that none of your abilities really do anything specific to buff you or debuff enemies really, except for your liberation, and I'll go over her optimal combo in a bit, but first I need you to just look at this. It's like they hired Ufotable. Fleur-de-Lis's Resonance Liberation, when her Forte Circuit is maxed out, restores 50% of your max HP and removes arrow erosion stacks from enemies. For every stack of arrow erosion removed, you get 20% damage amp on the attack up to 5. So at 5 stacks, you literally double your damage. I do not recommend employees show up to Tower of Adversity tomorrow. Fleur-de-Lis doesn't add arrow erosion without there already being some on the enemies, but Cartethyia does. With her basic attack 4, she can apply a single arrow erosion stack, but both her skill and her intro skill will grant 2 for a total of 5 arrow erosion on her own. It's not an absurd amount, but it lessens her reliance on Ciaccona, which I think is nice. Keep in mind though that without Arrow Rover, you can't actually pass 3 stacks at S0 Cartethyia, since Arrow Rover's outro skill is what makes it actually possible to increase the amount of maximum arrow erosion stacks. Kind of fitting that the Lord Arbiter is able to change the laws of the world. Cartethyia also has 2 inherent skills, with one granting better healing to other resonators and giving them resistance to interruption, and also granting an Arrow Rover buff. Cartethyia was actually made to play specifically with Arrow Rover on the team, as evident by the healing increase and the bonus Forte gauge they gain when casting their ult. It's actually kinda crazy. Her second inherent skill makes enemies take more damage from Cartethyia if they have Arrow Erosion. 30% for 1 to 3 stacks, and anything over 3 but up to 6 gets 10% more. So at 6 stacks or more, enemies are taking 60% more damage. Lastly, Cartethia's outro skill grants 17.5% arrow damage amplified to other resonators who hit enemies with negative statuses. It is oddly specific, but it works well in Cartethia's team, so I mean, I guess that would be implied because it's her outro skill. As for talent priority, I recommend leveling her Forte circuit first, then Resonance Liberation, and skill in basic. Your intro skill should be last. Of course, none of that actually matters if you don't know what buttons to press, so I guess I'll teach you how to play her now. With all of the new abilities and changes once you get your G-Cups, it honestly can be a little intimidating to try and figure out how Fleur-de-Lis works. So I'm gonna try and simplify it for you. And if that doesn't work, you can always button mash like your friends do. Cartethyia has a fair bit of skill expression, but her general rotation can be super easy to master. The gist of it is that you want to enter the field, drop your swords, go Giantess mode, go Sicko mode, and to do that, you'll need to commit this to memory. Open up with her intro skill, which will apply 2 arrow erosion to enemies, and place a sword. Then finish her basic attack combo up to basic attack 4, which will place another sword and give 1 more arrow erosion. Then you'll want to use her skill for the 3rd sword and 2 more arrow erosion stacks, and make sure to finish your skill with a plunge attack to plant that sword and deal massive damage. And you can go straight into Cartethia's ult right after that, putting you into Fleur-de-Lis mode. From there, you'll want to skill first, which will put you in mid-air, then use your 1-2 mid-air combo, then skill again, which will plunge you downward. You can then finish your basic attack combo 3, 4, and 5, followed up by a heavy attack combo 1, 2, and finally, finish with your Resonance Liberation. Before your outro skill, make sure to use your Echo. In short, intro, basic 2, 3, 4, skill, plunge, and wait for the damage, then ult, and from there, skill 1, mid-air 1, 2, skill 2, basic 3, 4, 5, heavy attack 1, 2, ult 2, Echo, outro skill. It sounds like a lot, but I swear it's not actually that difficult. Just practice slow and get used to that order. You do, of course, have flexibility in how you play her if you want to utilize different combos, and it's all situational for what's best, but generally speaking, this combo will be the easiest to learn for the highest damage playing Cartethyia. So the only thing left before you can really trivialize all the content in the game is to have a good team. So I hope you pulled Ciaccona, because for some reason she's the only other character applying arrow erosion in the game. I come bearing bad news, and the bad news is that Cartethia's team building is incredibly limited for maximizing her potential. If you want to have a strong Cartethyia, you need arrow and arrow erosion buffs, as well as arrow erosion applying characters. In that way, Ciaccona was specifically made for Cartethyia. Now, the good news is, Cartethyia is so strong that it doesn't really matter if you do 30% less damage, because the enemies are still going to be role-playing Fallout 4 by the end of it. The other good news is that Arrow Rover is one of her best partners, and their best in slot weapon is free as well. So your best in slot team is Arrow Rover, Ciaccona, and Cartethyia. However, if your Rover is busy or being used in a team with Peeb, you can use Shorekeeper instead, even though it will be worse overall. The same applies to Verena. Now you can also use the 4 stars Sanhua or Alto if you just need a character to fill Ciaccona's slot. Neither of them will do her job, but they can stand there, look pretty, and deal okay damage. Alto's outro is also good for the arrow amplify on Cartethyia, so even with the missing arrow erosion, he's not entirely useless. Outside of that, she feels quite limited in her partners, and technically speaking, she'll get great results even with a completely free-to-play friendly team with Rover and Sanhua, and you'll be able to clear easily with it, but it still isn't ideal. If you want to take a look at how teams compare, here's a chart on screen. Hopefully we'll get more arrow erosion characters later, but until then, keep calm and Cartethyia on. Moving on to the brain dead easy section of the video, there's a grand total of 3 wind sets, and 2 of them are for arrow erosion. Both of them work for Cartethyia, but technically speaking, one is a support set and one is for the one without shoes on. The Gusts of Vulcan set works fine on Cartethyia if you pre-farmed it, since it can give her up to 30% damage bonus total, 15 party and 15 personal. But if you farm the brand new Windward Pilgrimage set, it can give her 10% crit rate and 30% arrow damage bonus, plus the 15% from another character like Ciaccona using Gusts of Vulcan. Overall, this setup nets you an extra 15% arrow damage and 10% crit rate, so I do recommend farming for it. Cartethyia is also kind of different from other characters because she actually wants to use a different echo setup, with her prioritizing 2 4-cost echoes and 3 1-costs. The legendary 4-4-1-1-1 setup. Typically this means 1 crit rate, 1 crit damage, and 3 HP 1 cost to max out her damage completely. Technically 4-3-3-1-1 is fine with 2 arrow damage 3 costs, but 4-4-1-1-1 is better for her overall damage, making her pretty dang easy to build. It's super worth farming for the Fleur-de-Lis specific 4 cost because when equipped to Cartethyia, or Arrow Rover specifically, it gives 20% arrow damage bonus instead of the regular 10%, which is huge. For substats, the only thing that you need to make sure of is that you have at least 1 single ER substat with Ciaccona. But if you can get something like 120% for all of your other teams, that'd be pretty nice and comfy. You also want to get HP percent instead of attack this time, and of course, crit rate and damage on every single echo that you can. As far as weapons go though, that's a little bit of a different beast, since Cartethyia is an HP scaler. Also, as a side note, Kuro absolutely cooked on the drip this time around because my goodness, what is this? This is literally the best looking weapon in the game, hands down, no competition. This sword is plus 10 million aura. The stand user could be anyone. Cartethyia signature weapon is an HP scaling sword that gives even more HP on the main and substat, and in addition to that, it gives defense ignore. And on top of that, if the enemy has arrow erosion, enemies have their damage taken amplified even further. Who would win, this coughing baby or an atomic bomb? Her signature weapon is very far ahead of others because it's one of the few sword weapons in the game that scales with HP, and she does not care about attack at all. Other than that, you can go with Camellia's weapon or Emerald of Genesis, with both of them being pretty close in power, even though they're far from her signature. In fact, most swords that aren't her signature are close in power just because their base attack stat doesn't matter. That means that crit main stats are all the rage, and thus, Red Spring, Emerald of Genesis, and Blazing Brilliance all work pretty decent for her. Honorable mentions to Unflickering Valor, which is a branch shill weapon through and through, and somehow still makes the list. And if you don't have any 5-star swords, your next best option is a 3-star. We're just throwing the whole 4-star thing away today, huh? Guardian's Sword is a sword with an HP scaling main stat, which means it actually gives Cartethyia value. The other 5-star swords gave crit, but this 3-star sword is very competitive with its 5-star counterparts, giving HP and some skill damage bonus. And I'm gonna be honest guys, the 4 stars are mostly not even in the question for this. If you want to take a look at where each weapon ranks, here's a chart comparing weapons for Cartethyia. I'd recommend going for the best one on the chart that you have. And speaking of charts, here's an echo summary from earlier, just in case you missed it so much. For most people, it's really hard to want to pull copies of Cartethyia with so many different amazing characters coming out. But for those of you who are absolutely deranged like me, this is just Thursday. But anyways, let's go over them. S1 is going to grant Cartethyia a 10-second buff that makes it so that whenever an enemy is defeated, the highest stack of arrow erosion will be noted and given to the next enemy that she hits. So if she defeats an enemy with 6 arrow erosion, they will give that 6 arrow erosion to the next enemy. In addition, she also gets crit damage buffs every 25% of her forte that she gains, up to a maximum of 100 bonus crit damage up until she uses her second Resonance Liberation. This sequence is a pretty decent gain for her overall, but nothing super crazy yet. S2 is a pretty unique sequence node because it gives Cartethyia the ability to increase the max amount of arrow erosion stacks that enemies can actually have. When she uses her first Resonance Liberation that turns her into Fleur-de-Lis, the max stacks possible changes from 6 to 9 when you have Arrow Rover's outro skill active, and the next attack done will automatically inflict enemies with 3 more stacks, instantly maxing you out. At the same time, arrow erosion damage will trigger once and not use up any stacks at all. On top of that, Cartethia's basic attack, heavy attack, dodge counter, and intro skill multipliers get a massive 50% increase, and her mid-air attack gets a ridiculous 200% multiplier buff as well. And if that wasn't enough, you also get a cooldown decrease on her skill when Cartethia's mid-air attacks are used for every 1 sword shadow that you recalled. So basically, this thing's just a whole lot more damage, but it also makes playing Cartethyia without Ciaccona easier to do and see solid results on. S3 also helps that cause by making more of her attacks inflict arrow erosion stacks. At that point, you can basically play her without any arrow erosion units and still get full value. On top of that, you also get a 100% multiplier increase on her skill. S4 gives your entire team an all attribute damage bonus whenever inflicting any of the new elemental effects: Havoc Bane, Fusion Burst, Spectrofrazzle, Electro Flare, Glacio Chafe, and Arrow Erosion. Pretty solid for current and future characters. S5 gives Cartethyia a safety net for death, where if she would die, she instantly gets a 20% max HP shield for 10 seconds, up to once per 10 minutes. But to make her even more survivable, it makes her transformation only take 25% HP instead of 50%. In my opinion, this is her least useful sequence node, but if you're already all the way there, you might as well go for S6, with which she could probably hold off Goku, at least for a few minutes. Using her Excalibur automatically maxes out her arrow erosion, but on top of that, she gains an effect where any character that applies arrow erosion to enemies that have max stacks will automatically trigger the erosion on hit, and those enemies take 40% more damage from Fleur-de-Lis as well. Now, in terms of damage gain, Cartethia's sequences add more than most other Wuthering Waves characters, and she's already a ridiculous S0 character. Between getting her weapon and sequences, I'd recommend getting her R1 weapon over S1 though. Her R1 weapon is going to add more overall value from the free-to-play options and from even Emerald of Genesis than S1 would from S0. Here's the value you can expect from sequences, and good luck if you're going all in on Cartethyia. Personally, I'd prefer Fleur-de-Lis for going in.